The report titled "Children and Armed Conflict in Burkina Faso" was published in April, accusing both Islamist militant groups and government forces of committing grave abuses against children. The allegations included forced recruitment of minors as combatants, sexual violence, and attacks on hospitals and schools. Yet instead of cooperating with the United Nations, Burkina Faso chose to expel the very envoy sent to help. That is exactly what happened when the government ordered out Carol Flores Mauritaniac after the UN report accused not only insurgent rebels, but also Burkina Faso's own forces of exploiting children. The junta dismissed the findings as baseless and declared the diplomat persona non grata. This sudden rupture raises key questions. Why did one report spark such fury, and what lies beneath this clash? Burkina Faso has once again shown that it refuses to bow to international institutions that claim neutrality but are seen as undermining African sovereignty. In a bold decision that sent shockwaves across the diplomatic world, the junta led by Captain Ibrahim Traoré expelled the UN's most senior representative in the country, Carol Flores Mauritaniac, branding her unwelcome. The move followed the release of a UN report that accused insurgents, Burkina Faso soldiers, and community defense forces alike of atrocities against children caught in the conflict. For outside observers, this may seem like just another standoff between a military regime and an international watchdog. But for Burkina Faso citizens, it is framed as a fight for dignity, sovereignty, and the honor of soldiers who have sacrificed their lives in a war the UN has never fought. The controversial report alleged that more than 2,000 children had been recruited, abused, or killed over the past 2 years, blaming not only insurgent affiliates, but also Burkina Faso's forces. Yet the government countered that the document lacked hard evidence. No court rulings, no verifiable records, and no consultation with national authorities before publication. In their view, it was nothing more than a verdict delivered without trial. By placing the national army on the same moral plane as insurgents, the UN had crossed a red line. It blurred the boundary between those who slaughter civilians and those who risk their lives defending them. In a country where soldiers and volunteers are celebrated as heroes protecting their homeland, such accusations were not only offensive, but dangerous. They undermined morale at a critical moment and handed insurgents a propaganda tool they could never have created themselves. This was not the first confrontation between Burkina Faso and the UN. In 2022, just months after Captain Traoré seized power, the government expelled Barbara Manzi, Mauritaniac's predecessor, after she highlighted how the conflict was devastating education and healthcare. Once again, the top UN envoy had chosen to spotlight failure instead of resilience, painting a picture of despair rather than acknowledging the sacrifices made to protect the population. The message then was clear. Burkina Faso would not allow outsiders to weaken its spirit. With this latest expulsion, that message has only grown louder. Burkina Faso will not permit outsiders to tarnish its soldiers or rewrite its story. For years, the UN has claimed neutrality, yet its actions and reports often tell another story, one written without the voices of those who live the struggle every day. Complex realities are often reduced to statistics. The sacrifices of local defense efforts are ignored. Worst of all, such UN documents circulate globally, shaping how donors, partners, and even Burkina Faso citizens perceive their own military. In this way, the UN is not just observing the conflict, it is actively shaping the battlefield of perception. For a government fighting one of the deadliest insurgencies on Earth, this interference is intolerable. Captain Traoré has made it clear. Burkina Faso's sovereignty is non-negotiable. He has already rejected French military presence, welcomed new partnerships with Russia, and emphasized that African nations must reclaim control over their destinies. Expelling Flores Mauritaniac was not an emotional outburst, but a calculated move within this vision. A statement that Burkina Faso will not be judged by institutions that neither share its sacrifices nor respect its sovereignty. Critics abroad may frame it as authoritarianism, but to many Burkinabe, it was an act of defense as vital as any battle against insurgents. Soldiers on the front line do not fight for UN approval. They fight for their people. By defending the EU, reputation and morale of those fighters, Traoré is defending the very foundation of Burkina Faso's survival. Yet one question lingers. Why does the UN appear more focused on scrutinizing African governments than dismantling the insurgents' devastating African villages? Why do institutions tasked with supporting nations in crisis instead prioritize publishing reports that weaken them? For Traoré's government, the answer is clear. It is about controlling the narrative. Burkina Faso's war is not only fought with bullets. It is fought with words, headlines, and reports drafted in New York, Geneva, and Paris. Every time the UN accuses Burkinabe forces of atrocities, insurgents gain a propaganda weapon. They can point to the reports and declare, "Even the United Nations agrees your army is no better than ours." Such narratives cripple morale, discourage civilians from cooperating with the military, and cast doubt on the sacrifices of soldiers who have died defending their communities. The irony is painful. Since 2015, armed groups have killed thousands and displaced millions in Burkina Faso. Soldiers and volunteers fight day and night with limited resources, covering vast rural regions where the state barely exists. Yet instead of recognition for this immense struggle, they are accused, without proof, of committing crimes as horrific as those carried out by insurgents. To many Burkinabe, this feels less like oversight and more like betrayal. The pattern is familiar. In Mali, UN peacekeepers issued reports detailing alleged civilian killings while downplaying military advances against insurgents. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, UN studies cataloged abuses but did little to break the cycle of violence. Again and again, African governments are treated as suspects rather than partners. Their militaries are portrayed not as protectors, but as potential criminals. This framework supports Western narratives of Africa as a continent forever unstable, unable to govern itself without external supervision. This is why Traoré's government reacted with such fury to the March 2025 report. For them, it was not a neutral assessment, but a deliberate attempt to undermine their legitimacy at home and abroad. The junta's claim to power rests on one central promise: restoring security where civilian leaders failed. If the army is painted as no different from insurgents, then that promise collapses. Not because of what is happening on the ground, but because of perceptions shaped by outsiders. This is why the expulsion of Carol Flores Mauritaniak was not merely an act of anger. It was an act of defense, protecting the foundation of the junta's rule and the survival of the state itself. There is also the question of double standards. Where are the UN reports on the foreign weapons flooding into insurgent hands? Where are the investigations into the financial networks that allow militants to purchase motorcycles, rifles, and explosives across the Sahel? Such issues are rarely prioritized. Instead, the focus remains on governments like Burkina Faso, as though the state itself were the greatest danger to its people. This imbalance is not lost on Burkinabe citizens, who recognize a long-standing pattern of Western-driven institutions judging Africans more harshly than anyone else. By rejecting the UN report outright, Traoré delivered a clear message. Burkina Faso will no longer play the role of the accused in a courtroom where the judge and jury sit outside Africa. If the UN wishes to help, it must confront the real enemy, the insurgents, not weaken the hands of those risking everything to resist them. Until that shift occurs, Burkina Faso will defend its narrative as fiercely as it defends its villages. And yet, one larger truth remains. However biased they may be, the UN's accusations did not emerge from a vacuum. They are rooted in the complex reality of Burkina Faso's war itself. A war where the line between defender and aggressor has been blurred by necessity, desperation, and survival. This raises the next question. How did the conflict reach a point where such accusations could even be made? Before diving deeper, a quick thank you to the Black Culture Diary community, where Black voices, stories, and legacies are preserved and amplified. By becoming a member, you're not just supporting the channel, you're joining a powerful cultural movement. Now, let's continue. To understand why the United Nations feels justified in accusing Burkina Faso's army of abuses, one must grasp the sheer scale and cruelty of the war consuming the nation. This is not a conventional battle between two professional armies. It is a shadow war, where the enemy does not wear uniforms or line up across a battlefield. Instead, insurgent groups vanish into villages, forests, and deserts, striking from the shadows. Since 2015, they have unleashed terror that has killed tens of thousands, displaced over 2 million people, and crippled entire regions of the country. Unlike Western militaries armed with satellites, drones, and billion-dollar budgets, Burkina Faso's soldiers operate with scarce resources. They fight in remote terrain with outdated weapons, often without air support or medical evacuation. They face enemies who ambush convoys, burn markets, raid schools, and then slip across porous borders.